Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic? Let's do it. What's a punishment, real or imagined, that doesn't seem too bad at first, but actually is pretty horrible? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. As a kid, when I did something wrong, I'd have to write a sentence 1 to 500 times as punishment. I remember having to sit in the car at a family reunion at probably 7 years old and write, "I am a bad girl" 500 times because I'd taken a granola bar without asking. I've written "I'm a bad girl" that many times, repeated for minor infractions, and sentences like, "I'm a liar," and "no one likes liars," or "I ruined the day for my family," just sticks with you and becomes internalized. I'm 31 now. It's been a good 15 years since I've had to write these, but I still think about myself. Something I actually did to myself. I needed to cut weight for a wrestling tournament in a drastic way. Because of a mix-up in weight classes, I needed to drop 16 pounds overnight. What? I told my coaches that's not possible. Just pull me from the roster, but my head coach pulled me aside and told me there might be a way, and you don't even have to work out. What you do is fill a bathtub up with the hottest water you can stand and add a bag of Epsom salt and some rubbing alcohol to the water. Go into the bathroom with a buddy, stuff towels under the door so cool air can't get in, and then get in the tub neck deep. After 60 seconds, your body will already be screaming to get out of the water because you're overheating. I stayed in for 45 minutes, adding more hot water every 2 to 3 minutes to ensure the hell never ended. The buddy is there to make sure you don't die. Sweat out 11 pounds in 45 minutes. Bread and water rations were there to cause weaponized constipation. 30 days of constant abdominal pain, specifically tailored to humiliate, is a lot worse than, "Oh, bland food, boo-hoo." Peeling salted sunflower seeds with your bare hands. I had the choice between that and getting my butt beaten with a cable when I screwed up big time when I was like 6 years old. I chose the peeling, and I regretted that immensely. It doesn't sound bad at first, but let me tell you, after 1 hour, you just want to hold your hands in ice water. Your fingertips get sore. Sometimes you prick your skin, and the salt dries out your fingers and makes them really sensitive. Not to mention that the salt creeps up in your nail bed and hurts like shit, especially if you rip your skin near your fingernails. I never chose that punishment again. Outlawry. To be declared an outlaw. Today, we think of an outlaw as just anybody who breaks the law regularly. Back in the day, though, it was a punishment. If you were declared an outlaw, that meant that you were literally outside of the law and could claim no protection from it. If someone didn't like you, they could freely beat you, rob you, torture you, or even kill you. When the stories refer to Robin Hood as an outlaw, that's what they're talking about. It's not a romantic, heroic, or swashbuckling thing. It's the state of having no claim to any legal protection at all. The king, or whoever he appoints, takes your land. Anybody who wants it can take your stuff, and anybody who doesn't like you could just beat you to death without consequences. They can also put a bounty on your head and have people hunt you to claim it. What do you think would happen if you lost all protection from the law, and anybody who brought your head to the courthouse could claim a year's salary as a reward? So many things have been romanticized that are actually horrible, and being an outlaw is no exception to that rule. So if that's the life you want, good luck with that. Having to play with chicken. My grandpa always told me that when the neighbor's kid would misbehave, it's been 100+ years since then, his parents would lock him into the chicken habitat and put some liquid and or meat on his feet. The chickens would peck at his feet, and he would have to flee constantly until he was too tired to do so. Then he would be released. Goat licking. In medieval times, you would get your feet strapped between two wooden boards and they would be sprinkled with salt or something similar, so animals, mainly goats, would lick them. It seems like it'd tickle at first, but they won't stop licking. Apparently, they'd lick flesh off until they hit bones. My dad told me about a punishment that was given in schools when he was growing up, born in '54, which was that you had to go to the side of the aisle of desks and squat down into like the Asian or Russian squat dance and hold it for the rest of class. He said it never sounded bad, but after a while your muscles and knees would lock up, and at the end of class, in order to get out of that position, you had to fall onto your side or back to the floor to let your legs relax enough to allow you to move and use something that seemed so small would cause so much pain and loss of control. You essentially got insane Charlie horses when you dropped out of that position. Tickling. No joke. The Nazis used this as a form of torture in some cases. It doesn't leave a mark, so it's also used in environments like mental facilities where patients may be restrained and staff go on a power trip. Extreme cases can result in incontinence, vomiting, and a loss of consciousness due to the inability to breathe. It's also easier for the torturer to do it for a long time without wearing away at their conscience because the victim is involuntarily laughing, so it's easy to pretend that it's not that bad. Being ignored or ostracized. It might not sound like much, but as humans, we need the social contact, and leave it too long and it becomes incredibly damaging. Since you said imaginary, there was a punishment shown on Star Trek Deep Space Nine that Black Mirror copied a couple times, and science fiction has used it as a concept, likely before DS9. The concept is time dilation. The idea that time takes place at a different rate in a real world than it does in some other. So, for punishment, the character Miles O'Brien was strapped in a chair for an hour and sedated, and he dreamed he served a 10-year prison sentence. Or maybe he was longer, but in his mind, he would have trapped in this cell for years and years. In the dream, he may have been deprived of food. He was definitely deprived of social interaction, but at the end of it, he woke up and only an hour had passed. Actually, the next best generation episode, The Inner Light, played with time dilation as well. Same with the best Voyager episode, Blink of an Eye. Closing your hand around a chunk of saltwater ice and holding it there. Dubbed the Salt and Ice Challenge, where people hold on to it for as long as they can stand, it can lead to frostbite injuries similar to second and third degree burns. It also essentially fuses to your skin, so if you try to open your hand, it will rip off skin. You need to use warm water to detach it. I did this about 20 years ago, before it was a thing on social media. Sucks. Isolation. There's a reason solitary confinement is considered a form of torture. The human mind isn't designed to function in an environment devoid of stimulation or social interaction. Standing at parade rest without being able to talk for 5 hours in basic training. Someone got caught stealing food from the DFAC no more than 20 minutes after we'd been yelled at for people doing it. As a punishment, we stood at parade rest from 5 to 10 p.m. without being able to talk and with at least one drill sergeant watching us at all times. I don't know how to describe it, but your brain can only come up with so much to do for 5 hours while not moving. Kneeling in salt. When I was 16, my mother told me if I kept my attitude up, I'd be kneeling in salt. Being a dumb kid, I was like, oh, whatever, it's just salt. Well, I kept that attitude up. My mom sprinkled a light dusting of salt on the floor of the kitchen, and I had to kneel in salt for half an hour. The grains cut my knees and burned the woods. I'm 32 now, and still have scars on my knees. I will add this before I hit reply. I know this is abuse. My mom was pregnant at the time and not in a good place mentally. My sister's now 16 and has never even had much of a slap. Just recently, my sister told me she thinks I was just a bad kid if mom did all that to me. I told my mother about that conversation after. My mother said, "You weren't a bad kid. None of you were. I just had a temper and I didn't know how to control it." I'll admit I'm an adult now with 2 kids on my own, and Hearing her say that made me cry on the way home. I knew in my head I wasn't a bad child. I rarely got into trouble and never did drugs. I just had an attitude, but I hadn't realized how heavy my heart was. I was the first of 3 kids. I got the worst of it, and I always blamed myself. Even when I was finally over it and rebuilt a relationship with my mom, I blamed myself. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear her say that until she did. This was 3 weeks ago, and I'm tearing up just writing this. That sounds horrible, but this story, or what you shared, has a good comeuppance. Your mother finally taking responsibility for her part in the abuse. So, hope that closure helps. Painting rocks. A couple of guys in my AIT unit got into trouble, and the sadistic drill sergeant tried being creative with an approved punishment, which is painting rocks. As dumb as a punishment it is, the sadistic side is that this training unit was in southern Arizona during peak summer season temperatures. The rocks were literally hot enough to fry an egg on, and both privates had hands escaped and ended up being covered with second-degree burns. The drill sergeant faced pretty heavy administrative action. I don't recall exactly what it was, but it was probably one of the most severe punishments I had ever heard a drill sergeant receive. Being found not guilty by reason of insanity. No matter the length of sentence you're given, it's up to the doctors to determine when you can be released. A sentence of 10 years in a psychiatric facility could mean 20, 30, or life. The doctors will only release you when they've determined it's safe for you to re-enter society, and you are no longer a threat. What doctor is going to release someone and take the chance you'll reoffend? Almost none. You'll also be given medications that have terrible side effects. You'll be put on a budget of weight, feel sleepy all the time, and dizzy, and eventually drop everything and develop repetitive movements. You'll be in the general population with other people suffering from different ailments, from severe mental illness, which can drive you crazy in itself. The upside is that it may be slightly cleaner than a regular prison. You have a little more space to move around the entire unit, even though it's going to be small, and eventually you can earn day passes. Compared to regular prison, it may be a little better overall, but it is still a horrible way to spend your life. It's also incredibly difficult to have this defense apply to your case. So if someone commits a crime and thinks they can just plead insanity and be out in 10 years, they're most likely going to be found guilty. Famine walls. This was something I had never heard of until I took a trip to Ireland and saw it for the first time. These were famine walls, and they were built during the famine of the 1840s as a means to keep the hungry masses out of the estates of landowners. We learned it was the usually homeless Catholics who built these walls for a few scraps to eat. According to our guide, massive, largely pointless work projects like the famine walls and the famine roads kept the masses barely alive during the 4 years that the potato crop failed. The British rule proclaimed that the poor had to work for sustenance and not be given charity. Just think about how demoralizing this would be, day after day, building stone walls with zero purpose just to earn your bread and soup for the day. The shocking thing is the scope of the famine. They're literally everywhere in the countryside as far as you can see. My 10-year-old cousin, who is quite agile, never sits still. Once he troubled my aunt so much that she punished him. His punishment was to sit still in the bed and do nothing. No TV, no playing either on the phone or with his toys, not even speaking. No one was allowed to come to his room, so he can't even watch others. He asked her to read his textbook as he thought studying would lessen her anger, but she denied even studying. He had to sit completely still. Initially, the punishment seemed quite simple to me, but the impact it had on a small child can't take. At last, he broke down crying, after which he was pardoned.